The Freedom Junkies presents Breaking Free. I'm Ems Rickson, and this is Breaking Free, the podcast where I talk honestly about addiction, how it has affected me, and the things I do to break free, in the hope it will help others who want to do the same.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the very first proper episode of Breaking Free. Happy New Year, I guess. It's beginning of January, and so what better subject to be talking about than dry January and sober months? Because January is not the only sober month these days. People are giving up drinking for a whole month all over the shop. We've got dry January, dry July, sober October, sober September now as well, I think. And so I'm really interested in the idea of these months, whether they work, whether they can actually cause more problems than they solve, what is happening, and are they actually changing anyone's drinking habits long term for the better. According to a poll by YouGov, 3.1 million Brits were thinking of doing dry January this year in 2018. It's been going since 2014, started by a charity called Alcohol Concern. And they've just been getting more and more popular. And obviously, we've been having more and more months where people are choosing to take a month off drinking. And so I think one of the most important things to think about when we're considering a dry month or wondering about whether they work or not is about our drinking habits and the fact that they are often very unconscious. It is a habit. It's something that we are not usually very aware of. And something that really highlighted this to me was a BBC documentary that I watched a while ago about alcohol. And in it, the presenter was encouraged to keep a drinking diary. So to take a normal week from his life and to make a note of all of the alcoholic drinks that he consumed in that week, and to see whether he was drinking more than the recommended amount, which in the UK has recently been changed to 14 units a week for men and women. So that's a maximum of 14 units a week, which is about 6 pints of an average strength 4% beer, or 7 medium glasses of wine at about 12%, which is roughly a bottle. So 6 pints of beer or a bottle of wine a week, and that is your kind of maximum limit. And what I thought was really interesting about that experiment was that when he was questioned, the presenter thought that he had had a quite average drinking week. It wasn't particularly heavy for him. It wasn't a week where he hadn't gone out at all. So it was a kind of an average week. And when they asked him how much he thought he'd had to drink, he didn't think that he had reached the limit, or if he had maybe only just gone over the limit. And actually, he had drunk nearly double the recommended maximum number of units for the week, because he had reached his limit without even realising, just from having the odd drink with a friend, meeting up with a mate after work, having a pint, having a casual glass of wine when you get home from work. Drinks that to him were almost unconscious. He didn't even really remember having them. It was only after looking at the diary that he'd remembered that he'd had them. What he remembered was the night out that he had with friends where he got kind of tipsy, or the dinner party where he drank a bottle of wine with someone, the nights where it was sort of heavier drinking. But he didn't remember the casual one-off odd drinks that he had with people, which were actually the drinks that on their own took him to that maximum limit. So what I find really interesting about that is how much drinking is integrated into our society and becomes such a kind of almost like a knee-jerk response. If you meet up with someone, you go to the pub, you have a pint. Basically, it means that drinking has become a habitual thing that we possibly don't even notice that we're doing. One of the things that I think is really good about sober months and dry January is that it can highlight those drinking habits. As soon as you're suddenly not doing those things, as soon as you're maybe going to the pub to meet up with a friend, but because you're doing dry January, you're choosing to have a pint of water or an orange juice or a Coke or something, you notice all of the times where you would have been drinking because now you're not. Now you're sort of almost a little bit excluded from that. So it makes it a little bit more obvious when, where, and with who you were drinking a lot. I think that's one of the most important pros of dry January. Another one is obviously the significant health benefits that do come from stopping drinking for any length of time. So your blood pressure drops, your insulin resistance improves, you lose weight, you get better sleep. There are genuine health benefits to cutting down or stopping your drinking. However, those health benefits do get undone if you then resume drinking again. But for just on the pro side, there are definitely health benefits that come from stopping drinking, at least for a short amount of time. The other thing is that because it is a month that a lot of people participate in, there is momentum and support from other people that are doing it with you. There's motivation. You've got a date that you've got that you can say, this is the day that I'm going to stop and this is for how long. And you've got a good excuse as well. If people are trying to encourage you to drink, you can always say, I'm doing dry January, and generally that will kind of shut people down and they'll sort of let you get on with it, especially because a lot of people do it for charity as well, which I think is really interesting. So there are definite pros to it. I think the focus being on the fact that you can't fix a problem you don't know is there. So potentially doing dry January could highlight a problem that you might be feeling you have with alcohol, or just give you some more awareness around what is happening. However, I feel like there are actually more cons to dry January and sober months than there are pros. One of the biggest cons is that these months just don't seem to be that effective for people who have an actual alcohol dependency. The people that they're most effective for are people who don't really have a problem with drinking. For people that it's fairly easy to stop drinking for a month. If you do dry January and you don't really struggle with it, if you find it quite easy, then that's great. And that means that you probably don't have an alcohol dependency problem. If you are dependent on alcohol though, and you try to take 30 days off and you fail, then that can leave you feeling really bad. And there's not really a lot of support for people who fall into that category around dry January. The other thing is that I feel like it's just not enough time. 30 days is not a very long time. It might feel like a long time if you're used to drinking regularly, but the majority of that time is spent with your body detoxing from the alcohol that you regularly put, especially at that time of year. It's a very festive time. So you're potentially feeling kind of crap, and detoxing generally makes you feel worse. It's processing toxins from your body that can take up to 3 weeks to fully leave your system. So you spend most of the month getting sober and a very small proportion of that time actually being sober. And I can definitely attest to the fact that being sober is a completely different feeling. At the beginning, maybe you don't sleep as well because you're used to sleeping because you've had lots to drink. It can take a little while for your sleep patterns to readjust and to start getting healthy sleep. Once you do, it's completely different. But again, if you only allow yourself 30 days, you never really get to experience the long-term benefits of being sober. For me, those benefits were losing a lot of weight. That didn't happen in 30 days, but it did happen over sort of 3 or 4 months. Saving a lot of money, which again, I saved a small amount in 30 days because I was drinking quite a lot, but stretched over 4 months or 6 months or a year, those savings really start to become much clearer. So I definitely think that 30 days for making any kind of significant change and feeling like you have made that significant change to your habits is just not really long enough. There's also this kind of feeling that I've seen a lot of people who participate in these sober months on Facebook and social media talking about how, they're kind of smashing sober September or whichever month it is. 2 days in, they're like, yes, I got this is great. And people commenting saying, yeah, not long until the 1st of October or the 1st of November or whatever the first day that you can start drinking again is. And generally that tends to be the feeling of you're being forced into doing something you don't want to do for a month. And then when that's over, you can finally go back to normal and start drinking again. And again, that just kind of doesn't really bring a lot of awareness to your drinking habits. It feels like a kind of test of endurance, something that you feel like you're forced into doing or that you feel like you should be doing, and then not a lot of real change comes from that. And I think that if you're someone who finds dry January really easy and maybe doesn't have a potentially negative relationship with alcohol, that's great. But I feel like anyone who does, these months are not necessarily going to be super helpful. There are alternatives, though, that I've seen and read about that I feel are maybe something that could lead to more lasting change, more real change for people who feel like they're drinking too much. The first one I read about was Sober Spring. So Catherine Gray, who's someone I've read interviews with and heard interviews with on podcasts, who is sober and has written a really great book about that. She has started an initiative called Sober Spring, which runs from March the 20th to June the 21st. So it's 93 days of being sober, which is obviously much longer than just 30, which really allows you to feel the long-term benefits and to enjoy the feeling of being sober for longer, because these changes take time, increased energy, increased interest in doing other things. These things happen slowly, almost they're not even noticeable until you look back from a perspective of 3 months or 6 months or a year or 10 years even, and say, I can really see a lot of really positive changes that you maybe don't see at the time while they're happening. So it allows for a little bit more perspective and a little bit more time to enjoy those benefits. The other thing that I heard about was the idea of alcohol-free days in your week versus an entire month of sobriety. So if you do 1 month, obviously you've done 30 days. If you try taking days off during the week, so for example, 2 days a week, is the equivalent of 3.5 months throughout the year. If you do 3 days, that's 5 months, which is nearly half a year of days where you're not drinking. They also feel more manageable. The idea of saying that you're only going to have 3 days off a week versus having to not drink for an entire month maybe makes it a bit more approachable for people. Maybe it doesn't seem so daunting, but your overall alcohol-free time has increased, and quite significantly as well. So that's also an option for people who feel like maybe they are drinking too much, but the idea of an entire month of complete sobriety is off-putting. it also kind of speaks to this idea that we feel like abstinence is the only way to deal with this problem. So you're either drinking like you normally do, or you're doing dry January and you're completely stone cold sober. But there is an important middle ground of harm reduction and moderation that is a good entry point for people into the idea of sobriety and changing their drinking habits. That is a lot less daunting. I feel like if somebody had said to me when I was drinking, you can never drink again, or you can have 3 days a week where you don't drink, I feel like that option is much more approachable. I probably would have weighed it up and gone, well, 3 days a week is less than half of the week. So that sounds like a deal, and I'll give that a try. And without even noticing, you would have reduced the amount you drank by nearly half. So I definitely think that alcohol-free days are a more manageable approach that actually has more benefits than one solid month of sobriety in a year where you then carry on exactly like you did before. There are other ways of doing sober months and dry January, for example. One of the podcasts that I listen to a lot is called This Naked Mind by Annie Grace, and we will actually be having an interview episode with her coming up soon, which is really exciting. And she has written a new book called The Alcohol Experiment, which is a book about having a month off drinking. And I think what's really important about this is in the title, it's an experiment. The idea is that you go into this with an inquiring mind, wanting to just observe your habits and make more mindful decisions. And I think that's essentially the benefit that can come from either doing a dry January or something like Annie's alcohol experiment is more awareness around your drinking habits and being more mindful about the decisions that you make. I think what's great about Annie's book is that she gives a lot of information and education about drinking and what happens to your body, what happens in your brain throughout the month, which is something that I feel like is missing from dry January. It's, just a kind of everybody stop drinking for a month and then everybody start drinking again as you were, without an awful lot of awareness or habits being changed. So those alternatives, I think, especially the kind of alcohol-free days versus an entire solid month, is definitely something to think about. I'd be really interested to hear if people are doing dry January, if anybody who's listening is planning on doing it, if anyone is struggling, if anybody is finding it super easy and has tips and things to share. It would be really great to hear from people on the Freedom Junkies Facebook group or on the Facebook page. This year, for me, because I am now celebrating 10 years of not drinking and will soon be celebrating 1 year of not smoking weed anymore. So this year for dry January, instead of stopping something, I've decided that I'm going to start something. I've quit enough things. I'm going to start a new thing now. And so this month, my plan is to start meditating every day. So meditation is something that I found really useful when I first stopped smoking. It was something that I was really trying to get into the habit of doing daily, but life on the road, in the van, it's all kind of slipped by the wayside a little bit. And so I thought I would take the opportunity of dry January, a month where people are making an attempt to be more mindful about the things that they do and the decisions that they make, that I would take that on board and do something similar with starting a new, healthier habit. So I will keep people posted on my progress and see how it goes. And I would love to hear from other people about how they're going with dry January. I think in general, anything that can help you with your drinking habits, that can make you more aware if you feel like they are beginning to become a problem, can only really be a good thing. It's not a perfect solution. There are flaws, and there are definitely other options available to people if they want to try and make some changes. But if you are doing dry January, good luck. And I hope that you find this podcast useful. And I hope that you'll join us next time, which will be for the interview with Annie Grace, where she will talk more about her book, The Alcohol Experiment, and everything else. Thanks so much for listening, and good luck.
If you enjoyed this podcast, head to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. For more information, check out the Freedom Junkies Facebook group and our blog at www.thefreedomjunkies.co.uk. Thanks to Visceral Manifestations for the design, Ryan Swainson for the theme tune, and all of you for listening.